This week in the enterprise security news, self-learning AI from Fortinet. Zero North raises $10 million. Great Horn is offering its email protection free for 60 days. And WordPress gets automatic updates, as well as a little bit about a new remote code execution vulnerability in Windows systems revolving around SMB version 3. In our second segment, two pre-recorded interviews with Mehul Revankar of SaltStack and Utsaf Sangani, did I get that right? Of Synopsys from RSA 2020. And then two more pre-recorded interviews, Kevin Gallagher of NetSparker and Mark Rawls of Acunetics. Their names were way easier to pronounce. Stay tuned for all that and more on this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The Viavi Solutions Observer Platform provides SecOps teams a powerful combination of comprehensive data for threat hunting and incident response that includes wire data analytics and enriched flow records. Using pure, unaltered packet and net flow, Observer presents views across the entire IT infrastructure with threat alert features including scope, impact, and advanced traffic profiling. Teams can use automated workflows to dive into high-fidelity network evidence and more quickly resolve issues, minimizing impact on customers, users, and business operations. Learn more about the Viavi Network Security Solution and download free resources at securityweekly.com/Viavi. That's V-I-A-V-I. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly, episode 176 for March 17th, 2020. I am your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Mr. Matt Alderman.
Yeah, I was supposed to be in studio, but...
Yeah, a lot of people's, of course, plans have been canceled and or postponed. Of course, we will do our jobs here at Security Weekly to bring you the latest information security news because we can do so safely by using the technology that we always do to bring on our hosts and guests and minimizing our numbers here in the studio. I actually don't think we have enough people that would even be here at full capacity that would amount to 10. So we're all taking the necessary precautions, and I hope all of our listeners and viewers are as well. And like I said, we're going to continue to bring you the information security news because you still need it. There's stuff going on out there other than the coronavirus or COVID-19. But of course, as news breaks that's related to security and potentially the virus, and we'll bring that to our listeners as well because it's our job. So hopefully everyone's staying safe out there. A couple of announcements. Of course, many conferences have been either canceled or postponed. InfoSec World, has been rescheduled to January 22nd through the 24th. You can still go to securityweekly.com/ISW 2020. And there are other, as you may have heard, the Cybersecurity Exchange Day by Ocean and InfoSec World 2020. Ocean was hosted in Newport, Rhode Island. InfoSec World was Boston. We don't know. Secure World Boston has been rescheduled and or canceled. I'm not sure we have a new date on that one. But Cybersecurity Exchange Day was postponed. We don't have a date on that one either. We'll keep you updated as we get more information about conferences. Let's see. We do have virtual training coming up as most of the world is working virtually and or remotely. We already had virtual training scheduled, our first one with online business systems, looking at passwords as they relate to, I can give you a little more information about this now, passwords as they relate to compliance. In other words, the different compliance standards that will dictate for better or for worse, what your password standards should be. I will present a little bit of information about the Hashcat password cracking tool and summarize some information that was provided to us from our host that used that on pretty much a daily basis. So I've got Black Hills put out a cheat sheet. It's a version behind on Hashcat, but I found it still very relevant. I haven't found anything that hasn't translated into the new version yet. So that's out there. You can get that today if you search for it on the Black Hills site. I've got lots of cool stuff with Hashcat, how to get up and running with it, and recommendations on the best and easiest ways to get up and running. I was telling Matt earlier, some systems that I put Hashcat on really wanted me to like rip into my Linux system and drastically change the graphics drivers. My advice, and I actually listen to my own advice, is don't do that on systems that you use and rely on for like your desktop, unless you do have an NVIDIA graphics card. That was pretty easy. If you don't, you had to go in and start making changes. I would do that on a separate system. And the prices are really good on high-end graphics cards that can really crank through some brute forcing. So you can go to securityweekly.com, click the drop-down menu, and register for that virtual training. It's completely free. The last half of the virtual training will be cracking a SHA-256 hashed password and a live demonstration of that. So I'm excited. I hadn't played around with password cracking tools to that extent in some time. And it's been a lot of fun. On to the security news for this week. There is a Microsoft SMB v3 remote code execution vulnerability. Qualys actually had a nice post about it. And what I really like is discover, prioritize, and remediate, right? This is something that within these platforms now, you can remediate. It's been a dream of many of us who've worked in vulnerability management over the years to have this capability. And certainly in RCE and SMB is an event where I'd love the ability to just automatically patch things, right, Matt?
Yeah, and what I like, this is a very detailed blog post, but it gives a really great description on their new VMDR capabilities. It's not just the vulnerability data. They're also pulling in configuration data from policy compliance module to help with aspects of the prioritization. So we've talked about this for a long time, right? You've got a vulnerability, it's black or white. But then you can look at configuration data to see if that's a potential pathway or not. What Qualys has done in this blog article shows you how to correlate the CVE with effectively the CCE, even though that CCE standard didn't really ever take off, but
right.
Showing how the configuration's there to prioritize, then passes those to their new remediation capabilities so the appropriate patches across the appropriate operating systems can be deployed. It's pretty cool.
That blending of patch and configuration management in this particular instance with SMB. Now, and admittedly, I wanted to talk about this because with everything going on in the world, a new Microsoft remote code execution vulnerability actually took a back seat to a lot of what's going on. So I wanted to make people aware. I have not looked into it as much as I should have, but being in V3 means it's the latest version. However, as we've covered SMB vulnerabilities pretty much since the show's inception 15 years ago, there's lots of configuration that can affect the exploitability and vulnerabilities that are present in SMB. So blending that together to go, yeah, this one's not configured correctly, so it's vulnerable. This one is configured correctly, therefore it's not vulnerable, but still requires the patch in case that configuration changes. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, super detailed blog. I think they did a really great job of kind of walking through all the steps that the new solution is going to allow you to do. It is where we continue to see the market moving, right? And when you can tie vulnerability, configuration, patch into a remediation patching cycle, oh, hallelujah. Thank God it finally happened.
Fortinet is introducing a self-learning AI appliance for sub-second threat detection, according to Enterprise IT World. It's a lot of words.
A lot of words. So, I dug into this one a little bit. We saw Fortinet did an announcement last week on their next gen firewall, and we're like, really? So here's another Fortinet article talking about their new AI capabilities. So, I want to try to get through this fluff of AI, ML, blah, 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 right? And so I said, all right, what are they doing here? What technique are they using? They're using a deep learning technique. Now, in some places, deep learning techniques will be considered kind of a brute force AI kind of because they're using a neural network. And so I was like, okay, is deep learning, is it AI or is it machine learning, et cetera, right? And so if you look at the hierarchy, AI kind of encompasses this broad overall spectrum, and then ML is a subset of machine learning is a subset of that, and then deep learning is actually a subset of machine learning. So yeah, I guess it's AI, but again, to you vendors that are out there, get specific. Fortinet does get into what techniques they're using. And I think it's important for people to understand not just whether this is AI or ML, but what are the techniques you're using? In this case, they're using deep learning with a deep neural network to actually do some of this. To me, that's a lot more relevant than the broader terms.
Yes. Because, I mean, obviously there's applications of this, of AI technology that make sense and those that don't, and weeding through it is the difficult part. We should probably have some segments that talk about that.
Yeah, because deep learning is being used in a lot of existing capabilities today out there, right? Facial recognition, handwriting recognition, speech recognition. These are deep learning techniques. So we see these in various forms already. How these apply into security, I think, is something that we as the security community and industry need to explain better to people on how these techniques are actually being leveraged to do some of these capabilities.
If you'd like to come and talk on the show about that, we would love to have you.
Yes.
Aqua Security is debuting an open source container image registry scanner.
Yes.
I don't know. I've used these and I think John Kinsella and I have talked about it. I think he's even said stuff on the air about it. Like, mostly they tell you about vulnerabilities that don't really matter. Like, I thought we were over this problem of vulnerability scanners telling me about vulnerabilities that don't really matter. I mean, some of them do matter, but
yeah, but there's been other open source scanners out there, right? So this isn't anything new or novel. I think what Aqua's trying to do is to provide some capabilities into Docker and, Mirantis, who bought Docker, probably is a way to kind of entrench themselves a little bit to build out, their commercial base. But we saw this with Claire. Claire had these capabilities under the Red Hat umbrella when they bought them, and we've seen other scanners out there. I think the commercial vendors do a much better job of providing a lot of additional capabilities, weeding out some of those false positives, really getting into the vulnerabilities that matter versus some of these open source freeware kind of tools.
Well, and, matter is a matter of execution path. And what I've found when I analyze these vulnerabilities is, yes, that library does in fact have a vulnerability. And when I look into it, I'm like, there is no execution path to that vulnerability in my application. They're just even easily, conceivably, right? So I think that if the commercial vendors can help with that problem, that's certainly something that would be beneficial to help prioritize, is to trace back those execution paths. And look, pulling an image from the registry is one thing, but being in the pipeline provides you with opportunities to give you those insights to say, yes, this library has a vulnerability, and then explore the execution paths. There probably are vendors that are doing similar things to that, but some of this is uncharted waters, potentially.
Yes. Yeah, and a lot of it, even in our own application, right, Paul, we've talked about this before as well. There's certain libraries that might be there, but I'm not using or I don't want to use. Can I remove them out? So understanding the interdependencies and the execution paths are critical to ultimately resolving this issue. And so that means you have to have a better understanding of all the code components, not just a single container sitting over in a corner.
Right.
Yeah. It's a harder problem.
Yeah, because it's not that. So I try and make sure that I only have the libraries on there that we need, right? And that really speaks to, if my code never calls it, that's really just helping the size come down on your image, right? But oftentimes, as is with Python, right, the specific ones that I've looked into are, I'm using this library and I'm calling this one method inside the library, but the vulnerability lies in another method that I don't call ever, right? So that's the execution path. So
can a fuzzer actually help do aspects of this?
yeah,
Paul?
there are. I mean,
Right?
there are technologies that could absolutely help. Uncover these. Certainly,
It's the
like
correlation of the fuzzer and maybe some of the open
unit testing.
source vulnerability stuff, right?
Right, and unit testing gives you that's the code coverage thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's there are definitely solutions out there. I think that can help. I just haven't dug into some of the details with this specific kind of issue. There are vendors out there, SentinelOne and Greathorn. So SentinelOne is making their security platform free to support remote workers amid the coronavirus outbreak and crisis. Greathorn is offering free email protection for 60 days. These are just folks being good citizens.
Yes.
This is a positive thing.
No, I agree 100%. Look, we're a little lucky. You and I have worked remotely for a number of years. We're set up to work remotely. Right. We do our podcast remotely like we are today. But there are organizations out there that are not used to being in this situation. And I think anything the security vendors and the industry can do to help put some protections in place for organizations that aren't used to being in this remote environment, right? People may not even have had corporate machines to take home. Right. They might be using their personal machine that doesn't have any protections on it, right?
Or they have a laptop and a desktop, and a laptop sat over in the corner. Now they have to work from home, so they grab it and it hasn't been updated in who knows how long.
Right. And you're going to be working in web browser-based emails, and I can imagine the number of – we've already seen news around a lot of different phishing scams that are out there around this. So any protections that the industry can help put in place during this period, I think is great.
StackPath Edge Computing Platform gets an investment. Is that some new messaging from them in their Edge?
No, they've been doing Edge for a while.
Edge,
I mean, this gets a little interesting because Cox and Juniper have come into this round. They've raised a good amount of money, but we saw, because we were so early into container security at Layered Insight, we were seeing a lot of the early edge computing environments starting to come into play. GE and other manufacturers are really working on this concept of edge, where devices.
What do they mean? But what does StackPath? Well, what does StackPath do, and what are they referring to as the edge computing?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is a reemergence of edge computing, where you're not going to take a single sensor and send it all the way back to the cloud. There's going to be an intermediary step, kind of this edge component. And the best way I can describe it is, think about an autonomous car for a second. All the different sensors in there, right? I might have weather feeding into the car. I might have other telemetry data. They're not all necessarily going back to one big master cloud source. They might be going to these edge devices where I'm getting my weather feeds from here, and that edge service is serving a number of devices out on the network. So what we're seeing is this really interesting concept of these edge computing devices, primarily serverless, by the way, Paul, is we're seeing a lot of serverless components being used for these to scale out communication of whether it's industrial or IoT devices, so that they're not hammering necessarily the back-end cloud-based service or whatever it is, right?
Gotcha.
So then they scale out these edge devices. StackPath is playing in some of this edge computing. I believe they're serverless, but I didn't get deep enough into the article to know for sure. But they're providing these edge components. So Cox, where think about at home, all of the potential devices that are in your home, driving TV, internet, etc. Right?
They're distribution points, basically, so I don't have to hit the same box. Right.
Yep. That's exactly what they're doing. So it's just an interesting investment. You're going to see this in a few industries where these new edge devices and some of this technology will really help them continue to scale up this proliferation of devices that they have to manage for their customers.
A couple of industry news. Israeli startup Axis Security has emerged from stealth. Made a lot of headlines this week. And the article has two good-looking Israelis on there that have smiles on their faces because they got a Series A, and I'm happy for them. It's good for them.
Yeah, well, because you got to look at who's in this round, right? I mean, 1011 Ventures is here. You've got Palo Alto, Checkpoint, Imperva. some angel investors from Symantec and Blue Coat, right? I mean, there's some big names in this round. But I wanted to kind of understand what they were doing, right? And so the concept is application access cloud. So I'm thinking a CASB for applications, maybe. I can't.
Yeah.
I'm on their website. I'm trying to figure it out. I don't see a diagram yet. But I'm trying to understand how they do this. It's the ability to control access to applications, and I'm almost thinking like an application-based CASB maybe, but I'm not quite sure.
Well, yeah, because they say it's agentless, and that would imply some type of broker access between applications.
Yes, I think so. But like I said, there's no diagram, so I'm not quite exactly sure how they do it.
To all security companies, make sure you tell us how stuff actually works. That's important to the security crowd especially, right?
Yes. When you say agent, we get it. When you say agentless, now what?
Now what is it?
Is it a broker? Is it a reverse proxy?
Is it software,
what
hardware? Where does it sit? Yeah, exactly. Zero North raises $10 million.
Yeah, I know these guys actually. They Jay League's company, Clear Sky, initial investor in them. They're an interesting take on really focusing on application-based vulnerabilities. So they kind of think of Kenna, but for app vulns and prioritization, but then the ability to tie into the CI/CD pipeline to do some automation of some of the remediation. In the application space, there's a lot of different point solutions, tools in there at different parts of the build process and even into deployment. And so how do you bring all that data together, prioritize and centralize kind of, okay, where are the most critical vulnerabilities at these different stages, whether it's static analysis of my source code, software composition analysis of my libraries, dynamic testing, et cetera. What Zero North is doing is bringing a lot of that data together. But then I think they have some hooks back into the CI/CD pipeline to allow you to do some automated remediation around that.
That's awesome, by the way.
Yeah, very dedicated solution to that.
That's the next evolution moving forward, right? Is that I deploy my application, software composition analysis says, hey, you've got a vulnerable library or binary in there, you need to update it. Rather than just telling me, like, okay, go do a build and update the library and run it through testing and then give me the result, right? So as a developer or ops person, I'm not just getting, hey, you got a vulnerability, like we had the discussion about vulnerability management, right? I'm getting, there was a vulnerability, it successfully passed a test, and it's just waiting for you to push the button to approve, that update. So, and I'm sure folks are at that level already. Probably not very many of us, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think it's a hard problem for a lot of people to solve. I mean, they're working through their pipelines and the automation of their build scripts to their test QA scripts into production. Then you add security to that, and that really gets complicated because there's so many checkpoints along the way.
Right.
How do you kind of focus that activity? And that's kind of where the Zero North guys are focused.
A lot of that happens, at least in the build process, depending on how you set it up, can happen naturally, right? Every time I spin up a new environment, I'm basically installing all the latest libraries. At least that's how I have our build.
You hope.
We hope, right? You definitely need a check in there. Totally agree, right? But the way I've said, and that depends on what language and framework that you're using, right? In Python, your requirements file just has the list of packages, and by default, it should go pull all the latest versions of those packages. Now, that could break in the build process, right? And then conceivably you would get an error and you would have to go update your code because you're calling a function that no longer exists in a library or whatever, right? Those are typically pretty easy bugs to fix, although they can be very complex because everyone's software is a unique snowflake. It breaks easily. And so, but, automating that, I think, is the next step. But it is kind of built in. And depending on, again, your language and framework, every time you build, you just configure it so that it pulls all the latest stuff. It gets trickier with containers, though. Depending on how you, how deep down the rabbit hole you've gone of creating your own images.
And that's why correlating some of this data, bringing it together and kind of bringing it into a central place where you can get some visibility on it, you can put some prioritization in place. And then if you can build the automation into the pipeline, now you're making this concept of DevSecOps a heck of a lot easier.
Yep. Speaking of automatic updates, WordPress has announced automatic updates for plugins and themes.
Now, we already kind of get this with WP Engine today, don't we, Paul?
No. The WordPress engine itself, you can configure to auto update, and WP Engine, our hosting provider, who we love, will complain loudly if you're running outdated versions of WordPress and PHP, which you don't get with a lot of other providers. They basically make it very easy to keep up to date with the WordPress core engine and PHP, which are both super important. But as we know, and the reason I bring this up here in Enterprise Security Weekly is because our enterprises probably have some type of WordPress deployment somewhere, or if you do, you may not know about it, which really sucks, right? And then the other things you need to keep updated, which are equally as important, are the plugins and the themes. And you may say, why a theme? Well, there's basically JavaScript and CSS and all kinds. I mean, have been some pretty heinous vulnerabilities that can really fly under the radar. In fact, that one time when our web server was compromised, we're fairly certain, not 100%, but like 98% certain it was because there was a vulnerability in the theme that was exploitable. So,
and we know that if you update all of your plugins and you don't update your themes, certain things aren't going to work.
Yes, very much interdependencies there. So automatic updating of plugins and themes is a really good thing. I'm not sure why we haven't had that up to this point in WordPress. It does show a commitment that they have been continually making towards security. You know, the problem is there's just so many vulnerabilities out there in plugins. It can be tough to keep track. So.
Yeah, and some of the commercial plugins are not easy to update because you have to log into their site to pull down the latest version and then install it from there. So even auto update on some of the commercial plugins is not easy.
And even just like moving your whole site around. I mean, we talked about DevOps to use a general term, in the show already. Having portability in your WordPress application is hard when you get into especially things like commercial plugins, because you've got to like register them and license them and stuff. And how do you do that if your environment is ephemeral? I got to be honest, it's one reason why we left that to a hosting provider rather than try and do it ourselves. I do at some point want to go back and look at trying to put a slimmed down WordPress inside of containers, but like it's not for the faint of heart. Like PHP in general inside of containers is hard. It just wasn't designed to be ephemeral like that and not have persistent storage and secrets in weird places. So, yeah. What else we got? Beyond Trust Privileged Remote Access Solution.
Yeah, so what they're providing here is a way to gain access remotely to a device with privileges without needing to go through a VPN. Seems to make sense, right? I mean, why log into the VPN to get remote access and then get through? So it looks like they've created a streamlined way to provide privileged remote access without needing to actually connect through a VPN. That's what I got out of the story.
Yay. Good for them. I thought that existed anyway.
I think it exists in other solutions. I just think Beyond Trust just
is still rolling stuff up together from the.
Well, yeah. I mean, remember this is a combination of Baumgart, Lieberman, and Beyond Trust. I think.
Right. Yes.
Based
correct.
on the acquisition, so
and
they're still pulling pieces together and releasing these new offerings.
There was another one in there, Acceto, something like that. I want to say Accepto, but it wasn't it. There's one in a fourth acquisition there? Yeah, in there. So
I remember the big three. But yeah.
Nubeva unveils Nubeva TLS Decrypt to support modern endpoint-based decryption. I thought that was an interesting combination of words. I'm not sure what it means, though.
Yeah, when I was digging into the article, Paul, I'm like, is this how I want to do it? So it looks like they store the keys that allow people to decrypt data at the endpoint instead of like on the wire. Mm-hmm. My guess is this is more for a forensics capability when you need to go in and investigate an endpoint and what's going on, and if there is encryption in place, this allows you to gain access to that. My question is, with all the pressures around privacy, is this something that people are considering or just trying to stay away from?
Well, it looks like they're decrypting on the endpoint rather than on the wire, right? So Google Suite collaboration, Dropbox use PIN certificate-based applications, allows you to decrypt it on the endpoint. And again, I guess if it's on the wire or on the endpoint, privacy is still the same. It looks like they're focused more on the monitoring traffic, network traffic, but decrypting that on the endpoint, not over the wire. But I mean, who knows? They could allow you to unlock encrypted files on the actual endpoint, which files are different than traffic, if I read the article correctly.
Right. And again, in the days of privacy, is this a good capability to have or not a good capability to have? Look, I get it that at times when there's an attack going on and you need to gain access from a forensics perspective, but if this stuff is ever abused, now you open yourself up for some privacy requirements, either through CCPA or GDPR. I'm not sure that's a good thing. So again, this is going to play out over the next few years on this whole privacy versus security discussion. So we'll see.
And that'll round out the enterprise security news for this week. Stay tuned. Lots of interviews coming up in the next 2 segments.